So Donald Trump just filed another appeal, again trying to delay his day of reckoning. This time, he's fighting against having to testify in New York State Attorney General Leticia James' civil fraud investigation. But friends, Donald Trump is not going to outsmart Tish James. Not by a long shot. Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So recall that not so long ago, a New York State court judge, Judge Arthur Engoron, ordered Donald Trump, Ivanka Trump, and Lil Don Jr. to sit for depositions in New York State Attorney General Leticia James' civil fraud investigation of Donald Trump and the Trump Organization. And if there's one thing Donald Trump hates and fights like the devil against, it's ever having to testify. And recall that in his order, Judge Engoron said that Leticia James had uncovered, quote, copious evidence of possible financial fraud. So, of course, Donald Trump has now appealed Judge Engoron's decision. And he is again seeking to delay his day of reckoning, which is coming. Here's the headline about Donald Trump's new appeal. Trump's file appeal to try and stop depositions in New York Attorney General investigation. And before I jump into that article, let's have a look at Attorney General James' typically clear-eyed, straightforward, unambiguous reply to Donald Trump's latest shenanigans. Donald J. Trump, Donald Trump Jr., and Ivanka Trump were ordered by a judge to comply with our investigation into Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization's financial dealings, James said. Despite continuous efforts to impede this investigation, no one can stop our pursuit of justice, no matter how powerful they are. We will continue to follow the facts without fear or favor. You know, I only wish that Attorney General James' colleague over in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, Alvin Bragg, had the same clear-eyed determination to hold Donald Trump accountable for his crimes. But let's have a look at just a short passage of the new reporting about this appeal filed by Donald Trump. Former President Donald Trump and his two children filed an appeal in their fight against the New York Attorney General's attempt to depose them as part of a civil investigation into the Trump Organization, saying a lower court erred by denying the Trumps' request to quash their subpoenas for testimony. In their appeal, filed Monday, Trump and his children, Ivanka Trump and Donald Trump Jr., argued that if New York Attorney General Leticia James wants their testimony, she should bring them before a state grand jury investigating the Trump Organization, where witnesses receive transactional immunity for their testimony in New York. So, can we unpack that for a minute? Because you might say, well, Glenn, didn't you just say that Donald Trump fights like the devil against ever having to testify? And now here he is almost begging Attorney General Tish James to put him in the New York State grand jury, right? We just read that. Trump and his children argued that if New York Attorney General Leticia James wants their testimony, she should bring them before a state grand jury. So what gives? Well, transactional immunity. That's what gives. So the state of New York has this law. I'm going to call it a funky law. That's not precisely a legal term. Where if you appear before a New York State grand jury, you get full-blown immunity, full transactional immunity, a full get-out-of-jail-free card for every crime you tell the grand jury about. That's an unusual law. The feds don't have it. Most states don't have it. I'm not sure that any other state has it. It's a pretty funky law. But how much would Donald Trump love to be presented to a New York grand jury and then speed talk through all of the New York State crimes he's committed over the last 50 years, and as a result, he could be prosecuted for none of it. He would get full-blown transactional immunity under this funky New York law. So that would keep him from being prosecuted for any crimes he committed in New York State about which he testified before the grand jury. And let's face it, friends, Donald Trump already has his own little pocket pardon for federal crimes. And I would bet $1, that's my betting limit, I'm not a high roller, I would bet $1 that Ivanka has her pardon and Lil Don Jr. has his pardon. I mean, come on. Donald Trump was never one to forego a good grift or exercise restraint and discretion. Do we really think Donald Trump said to himself before leaving the presidency, I'm not going to give myself a pardon. I'm not going to give Ivanka or Lil Don Jr. a pardon. That would look bad. Does Donald Trump have it in him to forego exercising that awesome power of the pardon for himself and his children? Not a chance. Now, there will be legal questions. First of all, we're only going to know if Donald Trump gave Ivanka and Don Jr. and himself pardons when and if any of them are prosecuted, because then they will pull the pardon out of their back pocket and say, can't prosecute me. Then the question will become, does the Department of Justice have the will to fight those corruptly delivered pardons? I think they will, and I believe they certainly should, because I think virtually every court in the land would rule that a self-pardon is not constitutional. And a corruptly delivered pardon, perhaps to one's children to excuse their federal crimes that they committed perhaps in concert with daddy, is also the kind of pardon that judges would strike down, would invalidate. Only one way to find out. But I would bet $1 Donald Trump gave himself a pardon, and Ivanka and Lil Don Jr. all pardons. We just don't know about it yet. But of course, federal pardons, presidential pardons, only apply, if they apply at all, if they're not corruptly delivered and successfully challenged in court. They only protect the recipient of the pardon against being prosecuted for federal crimes, not state crimes. So that's why Donald Trump, in this somewhat unusual move, is goading Attorney General James, challenging Attorney General James. You should put me in the New York State grand jury. That's what you should do. I shouldn't be required to sit at a deposition in your civil fraud investigation, because no immunity comes with having to testify in a deposition. Under the laws of New York, it only comes if you appear before the grand jury. So Donald Trump is pretty darn transparent when he challenges Tish James to put him in a New York State grand jury instead of depose him. And she's not going to do it, because she's way too smart, and because justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.